We went over a little bit of Saturn. Neptune in Pisces. Now we're going to talk about Saturn in Pisces, since again that is part of the pairing that we're talking about. This transition from Pisces into Aries, and Saturn entered Pisces a couple years ago in the spring of 2023, and it is it's going to enter Aries here in May. Then it's going to come back in the fall to Pisces, and then it'll join Neptune again in February of 2026, like we said. And Saturn has a way of kind of correcting the delusions and illusions of Neptune. So this here, we got, the pin poking the balloon. So think of Neptune as the balloon of illusion, and all the stuff that happened during COVID, and all the stuff that were, the way the media has manipulated us ever since the Smith Modernization Act of 2012. And Saturn is coming in 2023 and popping that bubble. Okay. And it's a couple of nice quotes here. The Mark Twain quote has been modernized. It used to read, "It's easier to fool a man than to convince a man that he's been fooled." Now we just modernized that to be gender neutral. Either way, it says the same thing. Okay. But the idea is, it is easier to Neptune in Pisces someone than it is to Saturn in Pisces someone. Okay. There's no polite way to tell people they've dedicated their lives to an illusion. Okay. And so just to going back to, I'm going to look at both things, both the idea of CO2 induced warming and climate change, and then also things having to do with the mRNA vaccine, because again, both of these things initiated in 1989 with the start of the cycle. And so all three of these papers came out very recently. So this one's 2025, 2024, 2024. Okay. So there's so many that you can find. I just do a few on here just to show. Like this one here, the analysis rejects the theory of human-caused atmospheric carbon dioxide increase. So what this is saying, what this study found, if you dig into it, I didn't want to put everything in here, but you can look at this yourself. All the details are here. Is that we're not contributing enough carbon dioxide to the atmosphere to make a difference, is what this basically concludes. And at sea surface temperature and the cycles of the sea surface temperatures, that really rules when it comes to what we observe as far as warming and cooling cycles. Okay. And then this right down here, this one was great. They did an infrared flux data study, and what it showed was the opposite of what you'd expect. So it says, in other words, increasing CO2 delivered a net cooling effect, the opposite of what should happen. Okay, and so that's based on measuring the top of the atmosphere and the infrared flux and whatnot. So there was a 60-year study. So it basically proved the opposite. So if anything, a rise in CO2 would cause cooling, is what they concluded. And then here, this is a really interesting one. A couple of these authors, I met him before, David Legates. I've met Willie Soon. Really, this guy's hilarious, like one of the funniest guys. When he gives a talk, he's just hilarious. Anyway, but they did a critical reassessment of the human-induced, that's anthropogenic, CO2 global warming hypothesis. It says empirical evidence contradicts the IPCC models and the solar forcing assumptions. And what this also included was some AI. In the Grok 3 beta is actually they've tested different AIs, and that one comes out on top as far as being the most accurate. Now, all AI has its shortcomings, absolutely. But what this did was they did some more human aspect to this study, but they also used the AI to dive into studies in general, and they did something that humans can't do as fast. And it just the media only shows certain low value information, right, to the public, but there's a lot of high value information in these studies that never gets shown by the media for a reason, because it would contradict the narrative, and they don't want that. And so what the AI did was it dove into like all the actual studies, the high value data, the high value information, and it came up with the conclusion that solar forcing is wrong in those models. It's again sea surface temperature ruling, not CO2. It basically like showed that everything about the narrative is wrong. So again, this is happening while Saturn is in Pisces. It's basically popping that bubble that has been with us for a long time. It's been building, and it's astrologically time for perhaps that Berlin Wall to fall, right? Because we're at the end of the cycle. So everything that has to do with the globalism and the global problems that require global solutions falling away. Okay. Other things that we've heard, right? Low value information. Like how many times have you heard that like hurricanes are increasing major hurricanes are increasing, that tornadoes are increasing, etc. If you look at the data, when it comes to U.S. landfalling hurricane frequency, it's actually going down slightly, okay, over time. And then that goes back to 1850. So it goes back quite a while. And then when it comes to major hurricanes, so category 3 or higher, that's pretty flat line. And notice there's a gap there between 2006, 2015. There was no major landfalling hurricanes in the US. Okay. And what would cause that gap? Oh, nothing really. Variability. That's about it. Nothing. There's nothing that we're doing that is making any difference. Tornadoes, it goes back to about 1950. You can see the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was a lot more strong tornadoes, EF3, 4, and 5. That's the strongest categories. And since then, they've gone down pretty much. There's one little year here around like 2011. It looks like, natural variability. But in general, a lot less tornadoes now. A lot less violent tornadoes now. And that doesn't mean anything. It actually does. It actually coincides with the circulation, ocean circulations, the AMO, it's Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation. That's what it's called. And during the cooling phases, tornadoes go up. During the warming phases, which we've been in since about 1980, they go down. Okay. And we're about to head up again. So tornadoes should increase over the next, say, 10, 20 years. That'll be because of the cooling of the North Atlantic, not because of any warming. It's the opposite of what you think. And that's because tornadoes, in order to have violent tornadoes, you need really strong pushes of cold air into places where the warm air already exists. So in other words, the warm air is already going to exist in the south. But if the cold air doesn't come down hard enough or fast enough, you're not going to get as much severe weather. But when it does, like during the cooling phases of that ocean circulation, you get more violent tornadoes. So it is actually following the natural pattern, but it's the opposite of what we've been told. Every time there's tornadoes, like I saw, there was a Netflix special that just came out about, I think it was about Joplin, Missouri, that happened in 2011. Okay. In fact, right during that spike year, right? And then at the end of that Netflix special, it has that like almost mandatory thing to say is like, violent tornadoes are increasing due to climate change. It said it right there. And so that's just, again, it's a narrative, but that's proven wrong by high value information. This is high value information. We can see that violent tornadoes are decreasing over time. Now they could increase over time in the future, like I said, but that would be for a different reason than it's not due to climate change. In fact, it's due to natural climate fluctuations. Some other things that you hear, right? So again, this goes back to 2009, John Kerry said, scientists project that the Arctic will be ice-free in the summer of 2013. And then just this past December, same kind of article, again, low value information, all low value information. Nearly all Arctic sea ice could melt by the summer of 2027. So there's the same prediction about summer sea ice that now we're supposed to forget that it was made, several times before. Okay, this is the actual high value data of summer sea ice going back to 2006. Okay, it has a natural fluctuation, seasonal. The ice freezes when the sun disappears for 2 months, and then when the sun comes back and it's out for 2 months straight, it melts. Then it freezes, and then it melts. Okay, there is some variability, like up, down, going up, down, down, up, down, up. But when you look, the red line basically averages out, and there's no trend. Pretty much flat. It just kind of goes up and down, up and down. It just ebbs and flows with natural cycles. That's all it really does. And so just to understand, the Arctic is just all water. There's no land in the Arctic. There's no, the North Pole is water, but it's typically ice. It's ice all year long. The North Pole the exact point of the North Pole doesn't really melt. The overall sea ice in the Arctic does, though. Like I said, that every single summer you get a dip. Okay, for it to get to zero on this graph, that would be down here, right? That would be ice-free. That's what it's saying. Sea ice could melt by nearly all Arctic sea ice could melt. Here it says ice-free, which basically means 0 point. And there's no indication that is heading towards zero. Okay, so that was made in 2009. So that's right here. So they projected that it would be, by 2013, it would be gone. Okay, it was not gone. Okay, and now we got a prediction here. And the same thing, it's not going to happen. This is very much driven by the sun. The sun's presence melts, the sun's absence freezes. That's simple. There's not much that's going to affect that. Okay. And here's another interesting one. And this is lesser value information. This is great value information. This is lesser because it's only 1 year. This is just looking at this year, total snow mass in the Northern Hemisphere. This statement was made in 2000. Children just aren't going to know what snow is. 2000. 25 years later, it's a quarter of a century. It's a long time. And here we are with snow, especially in March and April, pretty much off the charts from where it would normally be, falling somewhere in that range. Okay. Pretty much off the charts. So why is it still snowing in the Northern Hemisphere? Okay. Again, lesser value information because it's 1 year. We're not looking at trends or anything. But 25 years after that statement is made, how can that even happen? Right. And then we come to this, which is a look at what could affect sea level, right? Because sea ice can't affect sea level. Whether even if the sea ice went to zero, doesn't really make that much of a difference. In fact, when I showed you the warmest part of our interglacial, back when Africa was lush, there's about a 1300 year period, sorry, where the ice was going to zero in the summer, and it didn't make that much of a difference. Polar bears didn't die. In other words, polar bears existed more than 8,000 years ago, and they survived that. But that would be the only thing, would be like, that polar bear argument, right? But that kind of loses its weight when you look at the reality. This, we're looking at actual ice sheets on Greenland and Antarctica, so in the northern and southern hemisphere. And what we're told is what? They're melting, and that's leading to sea level rise. And that would be true if there's net melting of the continental glaciers. Yeah, there's sea level rise, because that water is going to be in the ocean and not on land, right? But just to take a look, I took this snapshot, which again, this is all publicly available data. April 9th, just a couple weeks ago. And here is a look, here, this is your average seasonal balance of the Greenland ice sheet. So there is a melt season every year, June, July, and then in late July into August, it starts to freeze. You start to build more again, I should say. That's the average. But this year is in blue, and you can see like well above average here, about average for most of this period. And then since January or so, I mean, a lot more above average than anything below. So the mass gain, the gain of snow and ice on Greenland is pretty significant this year. Now, we don't have the whole year with us yet, but 7 of the last 8 years have had net gains on Greenland, not net losses. And this year is setting up to be the 8th out of the last 9th net gain. Okay, so that is so far from what we're told narrative-wise, right? We're told that the glaciers are melting, right? The ice is melting. The sea level is going to rise. If it rises this much, New York's underwater, et cetera, right? But the reality is it's following the natural cycle. Since about 2015, 16 or so, that, like I said, going back about 8 or 9 years, it's been net gains in pretty consistently year to year. And that's going to probably continue for about 20 years until the ocean circulation switches patterns and it goes back to the warming. We were in a warming phase, 1980 to about 2015, and yeah, there was net losses on Greenland. There was, but there was net gains before that. They don't talk about, right? They were taking advantage of the fact that we were in a warmer phase of the ocean circulation and that the ice was melting, but it no longer is. But so that ends that high value information can end that narrative pretty quickly. And then in Antarctica, same thing. This is a study that goes back like 85 years. Okay. And in the eastern Antarctica, there are, no matter how you look at it, the trend is up. So there's, again, ice gains in general for the last 85 years in eastern Antarctica. Okay. So that also is not melting, which means, if anything, sea level could be going down. It would be, it changes so minusculely, like, we're talking millimeters, that it's not going to be noticeable with these natural cycles. The major sea level rise happened between 20,000 and about 10,000 years ago, when we shot up into our current interglacial period. It went up about 400 feet, in fact. But that was because those glaciers on North America and on Europe, they were melting, and there was, that had a lot of coverage. I mean, if you look at Cape Cod, Long Island, those are basically the dirt piles from the extent of the last ice sheet. Okay. So like New York was under, a good mile of ice or whatever at the peak of that ice age. That was 20,000 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. And then it melted very quickly. Okay. But anyway, it's not, natural cycles are driving it. Another common one, just this will be the last one on the whole climate thing, is um, you always hear about burn acreage, right? In the US. If you go back to about 1920s to now, this is what the graph looks like. It went down significantly, and then it's pretty much flatlined. It's risen gradually since about 1980, right? But all you ever see in the media is going to be starting around 1980, going to about, so that 40 years. Yeah, there is a trend upward in burn acreage in that period, but it's taken out of context with the actual what is actually going on. In other words, okay, and they do that obviously to manipulate public opinion, and they don't tell you that this has to do with land management decisions. Okay, so around 1980, for environmental reasons, ironically enough, they stopped burning the underbrush. They stopped prescribed burns, in other words, because those are done to prevent large forest fires. And when they stopped doing that, lo and behold, large forest fires started happening. So, and this is a practice that Aborigines did in Australia. This is a practice that Native Americans did in America long before European settlers. The knowledge that if you can prevent large fires by starting small fires and controlling them, but by stopping doing that, and that was done for environmental reasons, they've caused an environmental problem. Okay, and this is something that Trump received all kinds of ridicule for, because he's not all that eloquent when he speaks, but science advisors always obviously told him about this, and the way he described it, I think, was during the California wildfires was that we've got to clean up the forests, and that'll stop the large fires. And he was right. What he meant was prescribed burns. He didn't say that, to clean up the forest. And of course, the media had a heyday, made fun of him, talking about cleaning, sending cleaning crews in the forest, and that's going to stop forest fires and whatnot. But again, that was true information. Now we move over to the mRNA. And, I don't want to frighten you if you took it, if you participated in the experiment. So just take this with a grain of salt, but it is high value information. These are studies. Like this study just came out last week. And this is specifically on pancreatic cancer. And basically it came out with the conclusion that if you got the mRNA, especially if you got a booster, that the prognosis for pancreatic cancer is very negative. In other words, people that didn't take it have a much higher chance of survival. Okay, so there's a correlation there, a strong one. When it comes to miscarriages, stillbirths, you can see this huge spike that happened in 2021, a little bit less in 2022. So you can see this is when people were lining up to drive through experimental injections and whatnot. I personally opted out myself. Like I said, I don't want to scare you if you opted in, but these are just high value information related to it. There's a couple of studies that came out. This one is from early 2024. This one's from early 2025, the Yale study. But this one here, the Hill, just it was 99,000, or not, sorry, 99 million people that participated in the experiment. And this is a list form of what is here. So that's the same thing. But you can see how much specific manufacturers of the experiment and how many times it increased your risk of certain conditions like blood clots, myocarditis, pericarditis. I mean, that's 6 to 7 times with Moderna, AstraZeneca. That's pretty significant. The fact that they're finding that. I mean, again, this is high value information. It's a full study. I think the AstraZeneca injection was actually taken off the market. Considering that you could lose your job if you didn't take it in some cases, is just pretty messed up. This goes back to Neptune and Pisces, and then the whole double down of Capricorn energy when Saturn entered, Saturn conjuncted Pluto, and it re-amplified the whole globalist push of the Saturn-Neptune cycle in Capricorn. And then the Yale study came out, and it talks about long COVID, which is what they're calling in that study. So this is just, commentary on this study. So this is lesser value information, but it's just the way it's being. She's just interpreting this information essentially, but they call it post-vaccination syndrome, and it's similar to in AIDS, like she's saying. I mean, it's in the fact that your immune system is deficient, okay, and so it causes things like fatigue, brain fog, insomnia, dizziness, and this stuff developed shortly after vaccination, and it's lasting a long time. In fact, this is low value information, what I'm going to say right here is my opinion, but I don't know of anyone who didn't participate in the experiment that uh, interprets any kind of condition where they have long COVID, for example. Anyone that claims to have long COVID is someone who participated in the experiment. So in other words, it's not from the COVID, it's from the experiment. That's what this study is kind of saying here. Okay. And then going back to the idea of the U.S. Agency for International Development Funds, we're finding out that the media itself has been heavily funded by that. Okay, and finding out where this money is going is a high priority for the majority of people that were polled here. And again, polls are not super high value information, but they give us an idea of popular opinion. And so, as far as popular opinion goes, most people want waste, fraud, and inefficiency reduced, regardless of their political affiliation. So what's happening with DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency? The majority of people are for it in some form. There's no such thing as a perfect way to do it. No such thing as a perfect person to have in charge of it. But the idea that it's happening is, in most people's opinion, a good thing. Okay. So this just kind of reiterates that, you have Clinton, Obama, and Trump basically saying the same thing, but these are globalists, right? And they're supposed to say things like this, cutting wasteful spending, but they're not allowed to do it. Okay, that's against the globalist code, right? Because there's a lot of fraud that does go on in there, and a lot of things that need to be hidden. And then you actually do something about cutting wasteful spending, and now you're the big enemy, because now you're the one that is ruining the global order, which is what his job is. Like we said, that's his spiritual mission, is to disrupt those plans. But now we'll conclude, move to the conclusion with what are the possibilities now that we've been through all this, and we understand how the cycles work. And now we can just look at this potential for what this is going to be, right? Again, the sky's the limit. Your guess is as good as mine or anybody else's, because it's 0 degrees Aries. Where do we take it from here? The power is coming back to the people. Pluto and Aquarius, with Uranus and Gemini. If the last time Uranus was in Gemini was in 1940s, this was a rapid advancement in technology happened at that time. Just to go back to the atom bomb, I mean, it went from like concept to production to implementation in a matter of a few years during Uranus and Gemini back then. And so hopefully that can be used more positively this time around. But the idea being is that we're really in a position where, new inventions, new medical breakthroughs, again, new energy breakthroughs could really lead to a position where, with the way our connectivity consciousness is now, again, we're post Venus occultation of 2012, and with Regulus now in Virgo, and the power coming back to the people, we could be entering an age or a time when these political structures that have divided us and that we're now finding are, completely corrupt, which we already knew anyway, but we're kind of proving it. We're getting high value information about that. And, we're seeing kind of Trump serve as the sloth analogy. Again, like I said before, he's just standing in the way, and we're the ones that have to crawl through the legs and then figure it out on the other side, right? Because it's our world coming in the future. It's not him. But he could have served a spiritual role that, again, blocked the intentions that were against us, right? But anyway, this is where we're at the next 10 months. Okay, what can happen? Does the government own the weather now in 2025? It doesn't. And should we allow them to further experiments to fight global warming, for example? Are we going to see the breakdown of the global warming narrative and the focus on carbon emissions? I think so. And I think I presented a lot of information for why that's associated with the Saturn-Neptune cycle in Capricorn and why it's time for it to come down. This pulse of individuality, defining our own truth as sovereign individuals. Is that how does that going to look in this new era? We're going to see, I think, the rise of independent media. We already have. I mean, if you just look at the ratings, I mean, most independent media folks that have a lot of followers on YouTube and whatnot have a lot more views of their videos than like a CNN video on, or even CNN ratings, for example. So mainstream media is falling, and no one trusts it anymore. And independent media is rising, but it's at a good time because, again, Saturn and Neptune, this means self-responsibility. self-responsibility for what we believe, self-responsibility for, like what we're feeling and thinking about things. So it's a lot of discernment. We're responsible for that discernment. So we're ready, I think, in this era to digest media in an independent form where we can discern for ourselves. And with the internet and whatnot, everyone has access to all the information. So they get a nice diversity of opinion and form their own opinion. And that's really what we should be doing. Maybe we have free energy breakthroughs. Okay. Free energy, there's just some examples of some, organizations and companies that are developing certain free energy generation, which also can have healing associated. So scalar technologies in general can both produce, theoretically produce energy infinitely and also promote healing. Okay. So maybe we have those breakthroughs, and that's kind of what brings in this era of freedom. Okay. And these are just some examples of those free energy technologies and whatnot. And, it's what's called over unity energy, which means they're producing more than it takes to run. Okay. It's interesting because just last week, April 14th, and take this with a grain of salt. Again, it's low value information, but what the director of the White House Office of Science, Technology and Policy said last week, he said, our technologies permit us to manipulate time and space. They leave distance annihilated, cause things to grow, and improve productivity. This, to me, at the most, this is just like a foreshadowing, predictive programming at the most. I don't think this is some admission of anything. I just think this is a foreshadowing of collective consciousness of where we're headed and what we're about to break through. And then coming off of where we've been, when you realize that the two most profitable businesses are war and illness, it's easy to understand what's going on. Again, the power of a meme, the very positive thing that came out of Neptune and Pisces, right? It's very true, right? War and illness. What if we stop war and illness? Where would we be? This is just, reiterating the idea again, the power of a meme. It only has 2 words on it, and it totally says everything that it means. And this is a great little quote. 99% of us, probably more than that, are good-hearted people who respect others and want peace. The other 1% rule the world, tell us we're at war. And this, I think, is my most important slide on this, because this, again, reiterates our self-responsibility with Saturn, Neptune in Aries. Okay. When we take control and responsibility for the war within us, think of that. Control and responsibility, it's Saturn and Aries. Because there's a lot of disagreement within each of us, right? This is where astrology comes in. You look at your chart, you see like where your conflicts are, and those are the things you're likely to project if you don't want to own all of it. But when we do take responsibility for the war within us, we can dissolve the wars around us. Okay, that's Neptune and Aries, dissolving the wars around us. Because this Neptune and Saturn and Aries together, that could be used for perpetual war, for meaningless, right, nebulous perpetual war. We don't want that to happen. So it's our responsibility. And that's where this picture comes, this meme comes in. It's another great meme, right? We let that person in power, that Capricornian energy, take control until we say, wait, Saturn and Neptune are now in Aries. And then everyone says, oh yeah, and Pluto's in Aquarius, and Uranus is in Gemini. We're your boss now, essentially. And this is up to us, because we can't let ourselves be divided anymore. We can't be divided with how the media works. We got to remember that, like, we have more in common with each other than we do with the leaders that we think are on our side, right? Okay, and that goes back to the whole idea of like the extremes of Trump derangement versus Trump worship syndrome, right? And the same systems we see crumbling in society are being called to crumble in each of us individually. So this is where that, really comes into play with Saturn, Neptune, because in Aries, because that has to do with individuality. We really got to take responsibility for ourselves. The outside world will not change until we change ourselves, right? And so our ability to cooperate with others and to bring peace into situations starts with being accountable for our own mental and emotional well-being. We've all heard the phrases, my body, my choice. Well, with Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, what about my emotional body, my choice? My mental body, my choice, right? Because this is what the media controls, our emotional and mental bodies, if we let them. If we let narratives control us, if we let low-value information control us, that's what we're left with. is that being under control. But if we only accept high value information and we keep our emotions and our mental bodies in check and take responsibility for what we feel and what we think, that's empowering. And that's also infectious, right? And when we know and accept our internal disagreement, like I said, this is our looking at our own chart, looking at our own energy. Like, where is our internal disagreements? Because that's what leads to projection. That's what leads to, dissent, et cetera, et cetera. We can experience the healing that arises out of allowing the freedom of disagreement. Disagreement is okay. Disagreement within us and without us is okay. We don't have to compromise peace. I always say, to be free, we must disagree. If you need to agree to feel okay, to feel safe, to feel loved, to feel accepted, you'll never know freedom. Okay? Agreement is for safety purposes. It's not for freedom purposes. If we want to be free, we have to allow disagreement. Okay? That's disagreement within and disagreement with others. And so we really need to come to the table, take accountability for that. And that's really what I'm trying to work with a little bit more, is what I call creating compatibility. It's this system where I work with the planets, as well as some techniques from HeartMath, which coincide with those planets for some strange reason. I found it really interesting. I mean, I have very brief information here. You can dive into my playlist on my YouTube channel. It's called Creating Compatibility. I go very deep into this. So if that's something that interests you, you can look into that. But it's basically looking at these 5 unconscious characters in us: the moon, Mercury, Venus, sun, and Mars, and then how they operate in the unconscious modes: the earth, the water, the fire, and the air, right? And it's just very interesting. You can use this for like small groups, you can use it for large groups, you can use it for small companies, etc., families, one-on-one relationships. You can go even deeper on those. But the idea is understanding our differences. Okay, that's really what this comes down to. Understanding our own unique setup, our own sovereign existence, and how we differ from others, and how we can create compatibility based on those differences. And that's where these techniques from HeartMath come in, because they're literal breathing techniques and emotional regulation techniques that come in with this mental awareness. So it's bringing in the mental awareness of our differences with some emotional techniques where we can balance our differences. And that's really the core of what this does. Because a lot of people come to me and say, hey, are we compatible? And there's no answer to that question, because there's no such thing as being compatible. There's having a willingness to create compatibility. That's all that can exist. If you have 2 individuals that have a willingness to create compatibility, so they want to dive in to, on a mental level, what their differences are, and then on an emotional level, how to balance that, then they can create compatibility. It doesn't matter if your Mars is squaring someone else's Mars, because there's value there. There's information there. And there's a way to make that work. And it needs to be a willingness to make it work, and then it can work. Okay, so that's what creating compatibility is about. It's for this new era. It's for this, this Saturn, Neptune in Aries, with the sextiles to Uranus and Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius. It's for that energy specifically. And it came to me early because I have Mercury in Aries, so I get this information. So the whole term sovereign harmony makes more sense in this era. Creating compatibility makes sense in this era. That's the curse of Mercury in Aries, is I get information too early. Okay, just an interesting thing here on that concept of differences and respecting differences, etc. In good fences making good neighbors. This is in Minnesota. They tracked some wolf packs, and very interesting. They found how respectful the wolves are to their boundaries. Right. This is sovereign harmony right here in action. Okay, they're establishing their boundaries and they're respecting their boundaries. Okay, they're realizing they are sovereign packs. Okay, and this is just the way it looks in nature. So nature agrees in a lot of ways. So just as a final note, when all of the lights are shining the brightest, the shadows disappear. Okay, so if we think of ourselves as individual lights, as long as we're shining completely, we're honoring ourselves. That's when the shadows go away. That's when the projection goes away. Okay, respect our differences inside, then we can expect the differences outside of us. Okay, things are not getting worse. They're just getting uncovered. Okay, we must hold each other tight and continue to pull back the veil. So if you made it this far, congratulations. very happy that you stayed with me. And like I said, if you watched it on YouTube, you probably had to break it up into a few pieces because I think this went about 2.5 hours. So a little longer than I wanted, but there's a lot of valuable information here. I think I'm going to probably split this up and put it in pieces so it's more digestible. Okay. But the whole version will be available as well. So again, if you feel like you learned a lot here and it was a valuable use of your time, if you wanted to donate, please feel free to do so. Don't have to, no obligation. Also, if you're interested in more videos and this is the first one you've come across, please do subscribe, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And share it with anyone that you think might find this useful. And go to my website anytime, sovereignharmony.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram. You can find me on Telegram. I'm on TikTok. Embarrassed about that one. But where else am I? Yeah, obviously here on YouTube. So, find me on all the different socials. If you want to get more regular updates on astrology and things of that nature. And thanks a lot for joining. And let me know if you have any comments. Happy to answer questions. Happy to dive deeper into some of the more technical stuff that I went over. And I hope you learned something. Okay. So anyway, thanks for stopping by and we'll see you again later.